Hey Tim Fullerton.
Hello.
I'm not going to ask the three-worded question that I normally ask you because I think right now, how are you? Is like, what do you mean? Like it's
I
a
know.
meme, right? Like okay, what's your favorite how are you meme? Mine is the Alana Glazer, how am I? Which all of my friends, the air quotes. What's
Yep.
your favorite how are you meme? Is it the like the cartoon burning? Is it a
Actually,
Rick and
yes, I was
Morty?
gonna say it's not even a how are you? It's sort of that one with the either it's the cartoon in the fire or
Right.
it's the Donald Glover from Community coming in with pizzas and the room is on fire. Well, that's
Right.
kind of what it feels like right now, right? Let's be honest. And we are laughing only because the other option is tears, and we're not going to do that right now. So,
All
uh,
right.
yeah.
Hello, welcome to Politigood. I'm Rachel Parker.
And I'm Tim Fullerton.
Oh, this week. It's just us, Tim. We're here to Oh god. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about this week because it's such a struggle to find a way to have a balanced conversation about anything because Trump and company have once again flooded the zone. And also we want to say that just yesterday we learned about this just horrific airline
Yeah.
disaster in the skies above the Capitol and the typical way that Trump responded to it. It's all terrible. I would not include that in the context of what Trump does, but I do want to say that the response to it from the administration certainly qualifies as his primary skill, which is to obfuscate, deflect, and confuse people. So
Mhm.
that's what we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about how to survive the flooded zone, which is what I wrote about in our Politigood newsletter this week. So for those of you who don't know, we have a newsletter. If you go to politigoodpod.com, you'll find it. We publish it on Ghost. And the name of the newsletter is Digest Ed. Get it? It's like it's digested for you, but it's very clever spelling. I'm very proud of myself. Anyway, so Tim, we were gonna start off at the top of the podcast, just kind of talking about that. But I think an unfortunate example of what I'm talking about is the letter that you got from your son's school, which I don't. I think you just need to talk about what it is, and
Yeah.
then we'll just kind of go from there, right?
So for those of you who don't know, I live in New York City, and so obviously New York is one of the focal points of Trump's immigration roundups, I guess we will call them, bringing ICE agents into cities unannounced and without really any clear view, detaining people, and which we've already seen at least one or two examples of people that were legal immigrants or otherwise known as citizens who have been rounded up in this and fortunately released. But you could tell the chaos that's going on. But my son is a kindergartner at a public school in New York, and yesterday we got a letter from his superintendent. They didn't use the term ICE, but you could tell what they meant, and they said that if there were any federal law enforcement agents coming to the school, that they had a plan to deal with it, or a plan to address it, which I will be honest, is not a very reassuring thing to say to a parent when you are thinking about ICE agents, all dressed in black and likely carrying weapons, running into a elementary school looking for undocumented children who have done nothing wrong except existed. And I mean, I think, and this shows some of my privilege, right? But like, it was the first time that it came I came face to face with, other than COVID in the first administration, but face to face with a Trump policy that is meant to scare and frighten people into compliance and helping them find the people that they're looking for. I can tell you, and I did a video on TikTok about this. If people want to check it out, and the name is just Tim Fullerton. If you find me, but I'm usually pretty measured when I talk about these things on camera. And yesterday's, I'll say there were a few f bombs thrown out, but I was just angry, and I wanted people to see that I was angry, and I wanted to have people see somebody who looks like me be angry, because frankly, white men are the group that need to be louder about this stuff. And it was just infuriating to me that, you know, my 5-year-old is potentially being put into harm's way by the federal government, because we've all seen how these raids work. It's not just a clean process. And, I mentioned in my video, it's also extra infuriating that these, Trump voters are the reason that we can't have sensible national gun laws, but yet now we're going to send law enforcement officers that are armed coming to look for children, not adults, and not adults that have created or have done any crimes, children as young as 5, that they're going to put in the middle of this political debate. And it is disgusting, it is revolting, and most importantly, it is un-American. And luckily we have a great community here that will push back on this, but it was really, and I know people are getting these letters across the country because people were telling me in the comments, this is not just about New York, this is everywhere. And it's not just urban areas either. It's rural. I'm from Maine. And the school district that I grew up in and that my mom taught in for 40 years sent that letter out. And Bath, Maine, where I'm from, is one of the least diverse communities in the country. Maine is actually the least diverse state in the country, at least it used to be. And they're getting these letters. So it's a really dark time, and it's another one of those things to add on here, but it's on our topic of how do you cope? This one is the one that I obviously am going to be focusing on more than some of the other ones, because my family is now theoretically put in harm's way by these decisions, or at least mentally.
And you'll be connected to people who are affected by it. So you'll be, it won't be something foreign or distant. It'll be something where it's like, oh, that's a friend of my son's. I know his parents, or her parents or their parents. So just to give you guys, the listeners, a little bit of a peek into how we're sort of building our nascent media channels. Every week we have a split hour-long planning meeting on Mondays where we talk about, what's up, what's going on with kind of the general workflow this week with clients. We typically also have individual meetings about those because that's how agencies work. And then basically like the other half of the meeting is talking about what we're doing right now. So the newsletters, our video content, our podcast, and so forth. And when we were talking about last week's newsletter, I had a bunch of headlines about down ballot assholes. That's what I call them. Down ballot assholes. Governors who are like the governor of Missouri, who is already saying, I will use the National Guard to help round up immigrants. And Missouri is probably going to be a state that builds and uses like really derelict prisons and other detention centers that have been closed because they're not safe, or building like basically FEMA tents to house detainees, and they're just using that term because that gives them sort of blanket and this is all thanks to W's government, by the way, essentially. So I had that all set to go, and Tim, I forget even what was happening on Monday. That's how good Trump is at drowning us. That might have been the day that they announced and then did announce and then unannounced and then announced that they were pausing all federal grants and loans. And you said, we can't do that to people right now. You can't, you're right. We had about a 3-minute conversation about it. And essentially where we ended is that is important information for people to know, but we cannot bombard them with that right now, Rachel. And I was like, well, what do we say instead? And you said, remember what you said? It's in the newsletter. Do you remember what you said?
Oh God, I can't remember now.
Okay.
I do. We have to give people some hope.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was like, how am I going to, all right. So this is where, I reverse engineered. I do this often when I'm thinking about how to help clients, people, whatever. I reverse engineered what I do in my own life, which is I should say my husband is really good at ingesting a lot of news. He's very good at it. So I have someone who I live with who's like, when he has his phone out, he's either playing word games, responding to a text, like messaging with people somehow, or reading like the American Prospect or the name a newsletter, right? Like he gets all of them. So Drop Site or something, the Intercept or whatever. So he kind of, and the Guardian and the New York Times, and then he'll say, "Did you hear about?" And then that's one of the ways that I stay kind of on top of things. So I'm, that was my choice, is to marry someone like that. But I kind of pick areas of interest to survive a flooded zone. And I did that in Trump 1.0. It's how I got through the Obama years. It's how I got through the W years, was to say, like, I don't have to pay attention to everything. And now it's worse, right? That's one of the things that I talk about. By the way, I think I mentioned this already. If you don't subscribe to our newsletter, we will forward you the one that we're talking about. If you ever hear us reference one, just email us at hello@politigoodpod.com and we'll forward you the most recent newsletter. We can do that. It's fine. So I want to talk about what we mean about kind of find your lane, follow an individual topic. And I'm gonna throw it over to Tim, because Tim is in some ways the best and worst person to seek this advice from, because you, the nature of your intellect, because you worked not just on a pretty well-known presidential campaign, not just because like a lot of the people that you sort of regularly talk to work on in campaigns and for candidate stuff, but you also worked in administration. So you've worked in DC, you lived in DC, you worked in DC. So in some ways, like, you're sort of predisposed to understanding how these systems work. So when you see certain stories, like, let's talk about the funding freeze, for example, you understand what that means. You don't have to look any further into right. You don't have, like, stories like that aren't going to make you go Googling, right?
No, well, though I will say I was so shocked that they went all the way with, 'cause at first I read it and I was like, oh, this is like certain things, and then it dawned on me pretty quickly that it was everything. Which, when we say everything, we mean trillions of dollars that have already been appropriated.
Right.
So what they were doing was illegal, first of all. But this means, like, Meals on Wheels doesn't get their funding, right? Or, if someone is in line for a government job or a job that is funded by the government, all of a sudden, and I heard stories, because when I talked about this earlier this week, I had people coming out saying, like, these contracts are being held, these jobs are being upheld, or held up, and I think before we dive into the focus, I do want to give people hope that they stopped that because we made such hell about it. Right. And I want to be very clear that, like, in their first week, they had a massive loss, and they control everything except for the bully pulpit, right? They control Congress, they control the judiciary, and they, at least at the Supreme Court level, and the executive, and they lost, and they lost pretty quickly. Like this one, and it's so funny. Every time the Republicans do something to remind people about government, whether it's a shutdown or it's a hiring freeze, they lose. Because they win in an information vacuum, and then when all of a sudden it becomes real, and people go, wait a minute, my friend isn't going to get this thing. They turned the Medicaid portal, the web portal, off.
Yeah.
This is the program that provides health care for poor Americans.
Right. Not just poor anymore, by the way.
No, I mean, it's much more expanded because of the Obamacare. And, but, like, I think that mattered. So there's going to be a lot of darkness, so we need to talk about how to manage. But, like, I do want people to know that, like, he's not even 2 weeks in, and he has already suffered a defeat. So it is not a hopeless situation. And every day we get closer to the midterms is the less likely that they're going to pass anything incredibly dangerous, because they're going to want to hold their majorities. Right.
So let's talk about, and I think one of the things I'll say to people as we talk about this hopelessness, and I didn't explicitly write about this, but and I'm going through a really horrifying time at home, which I don't talk about on the podcast because I will immediately fall apart. Like, Like I will fall apart like the worst overcooked chicken at the grocery store that you get home and you're all excited because you got your rotisserie chicken and you take it
Yeah.
out of the bag and you're like, oh, it's been sitting under that light for like 2 days, and like you poke it and it's just like gross,
Yep.
dried out.
Yep.
That's me
Yep.
right now. I'm that
Yeah.
chicken. But it does remind me when I'm going through something like this, because my husband has had health challenges for a long time, that you cannot look too far into the future. So
No.
for now, it is enough to stop worrying about what we don't know is going to happen, because the present moment is plenty shitty enough. You don't have to
Yeah.
fantasize darkly, right? So what we are really talking about right now is that Trump and Elon Musk, right? Because we have to throw Elon Musk into, because he's
Yeah.
basically insinuated himself into the executive branch. And who knows how long that'll last? We don't know. Again, I don't have to worry about that
Yeah.
tomorrow. Today, he's clearly being influential. He's trying to Muskify the executive branch, because he has a puppet. Donald Trump is a lazy, feckless, old ass man. By the way, people had plenty to say about how doddering Biden was. Where are they when Trump's like, I can't, like, you sound so ancient to me. Anyway, so we're not projecting into the future. We're talking about what Trump and Musk can do, which is to
Yep.
overwhelm us with lies and nonsense.
Yep.
And that's what we're here to talk about in terms of how do you cope with that.
Right.
And we have some suggestions.
Well, first, and
Yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
just jump in. And first of all, I actually am more hopeful at the end of this week than I was at the beginning of this week, just because we did have that big victory and that people got together
Yeah.
and said no,
No.
and it worked.
And think about how quickly we know, by the way, that they laid off FAA employees after. I mean, that was like like immediately there was outrage that there was that they were trying to defund the government, and now people are like, well, oh, the FAA keeps the airways safe. Like, yeah, that's its job. By the way, that's
Yeah,
the
and for
FAA's main job.
for those of you who don't know, they fired the FAA administrator. It was one of the first actions that they did. They also, I think, gutted a safety board. I don't think anybody is suggesting that that was the cause of the crash, but they removed experts for handling this after the fact, and I think it raises questions about the fact that we need experts in these roles to handle crisis like this. I mean, we haven't had a crash since 2009, so it's been a decade and a half, and they took out one of the leading experts, and I think that people were right to question that. But what I want to talk more about is like how we stop getting sucked into the noise. And I'm going to give some very
So
early
smart, yeah.
suggestions. Do not care about the name of the Gulf of Mexico. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Do not worry about the Panama Canal or us invading Greenland. It doesn't matter. He's not going to do it. It is all distraction. And this is straight out of the Steve Bannon playbook of flooding the zone. You put so much news out there. And by the way, they subscribe to a all press is good press mentality. You have to keep that in mind as well. And they do it while they're actually literally implementing Project 2025. It is happening, and they are not yelling about those pieces. And that is deliberate, because they are trying to distract you with the silliness and make you think, oh, it's just Trump being Trump. He's all goofy. He's wasting his time on this. And the reality is but they're implementing all of these things behind the scenes. And that's where we need to be paying closer attention. And I think it worked this week on the funding freeze. Like, people stopped paying attention to all of the nonsense and were like this. I mean, if that had gone through and they had stopped spending money, we would have gone at least into a recession, if not a depression. You cannot take trillions of dollars out of an economy that is, the federal government spends like $2 trillion a year. Take trillions of dollars out. The unemployment rate would skyrocket, inflation, everything. Well, we might have deflation, actually, because no one would have any money. But it would have been devastating, and people were able to pay attention. So I am hopeful. But I do think people need to focus on particular areas that matter to them. And like I mentioned about mine. I mean, I am a political beast naturally. And so like
And
I've
also
always
said, like,
enjoyed this stuff. Yeah.
right, and also like in a very unusual way, right? You're a political beast in a particularly unusual way, and that we've talked about this before. You've gone public sector, private sector, public sector, private sector, got like campaign. You had a role in government. You've had a role in two administration. Like it's a very specific thing. But people who are listening to you, I would say, have found this channel because they're perhaps interested in listening to somebody who kind of understands how all these things intersect. So that kind of counts, right? As sort of tailoring your news diet in a certain way. Because I want to talk about, and this is you just set me up for the transition I want to make. Don't you love, by the way, that my ring light reflects in my frame and it constantly looks like I have a halo?
You very angelic today.
Thank you. The only angel that drops more F-bombs than Tim Fullerton. Okay, so the current information systems that we have, and by the way, this is as we're recording this, 2 days ago, yesterday, again, the zone's so flooded. Really important announcement that Meta settled a lawsuit with Donald Trump, the individual, for $25 million for shutting off his social accounts when he was lying to people about the 2020 election. So that money, according to like sources, this is all, basically this is all, sources that we're finding this out through. I forget who originally published the story. I think I saw it in TechCrunch. That money is going to go to fund Donald Trump's library. So that's a perfect segue to talk about our broken, terrible, confusing, disorienting information systems.
Yep.
And how to navigate them, because they're not designed to inform you. They're designed to engage you.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
go ahead.
Rachel is more of an expert on the media stuff than I am, but I obviously I rolled my eyes when I saw that, because sadly I wasn't shocked. I was obviously I'm not mad, I'm disappointed type thing people say to their kids, but it's just,
you're not shocked, but you're surprised, kind of.
Yeah, the grift is off the charts, and it's just basically going unscathed. I mean, he was hyping meme coins before he was sworn in. It's just Trump. And it's just ridiculous. But we are moving now towards a model where we have to support independent journalists. And I'll give a good example. And I know, Rachel, you have probably lots of thoughts about this, but it was reported last week that Jim Acosta was being banished on CNN. Banished to the midnight hour, the midnight to 2 a.m. Slot, which in media is death, because nobody is watching. First of all, cable news audience is relatively older, so not up at midnight. And it was a deliberate attempt. It was pretty obvious that to get him out of Trump's hair, because he has been a strong antagonist. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh, he's out. He's going to go, and I'll be interested to see, because he's very popular. And what he has done, at least initially, is he has set up his own Substack. Actually, you could find him over, just if you find Jim Acosta, he's been doing lives on there. He's been doing reporting on there, writing, and people can support him for $5 a month. And I guarantee you he has thousands of subscribers already, and he's been up at it for about 48 hours. And this is, I think, where we're going to, and I think this is also what individuals need to do too, is you need to pick your media diet of what you want to follow. Because if you just do the cable news thing, you will go insane.
Or the social media doom scroll.
Or just doom scrolling, and even the good ones. If you just sit on Blue Sky or Threads, let alone X, it's not going to be good for you. But if you pick a few people to support their work and follow them and engage in conversations, you are going to be able to navigate this much better than if you're constantly sitting on edge waiting for the next New York Times alert to scare the shit out of you, basically.
Right. And I'll give an example of that. So I support a lot. People are not going to be surprised to learn that I subscribe to a lot of media, but two newspapers that I subscribe to. Someday I will support the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, but I just hate Lee Enterprises. So I got to get over it. We'll talk about that another day. But I subscribe to St. Louis Magazine. I subscribe to the Kansas City Star, which is excellent, and I subscribe to what's my third? Look, I just spaced on The Guardian. I get the Kansas City Star's morning blasts. I don't necessarily read everyone. I do not get the Guardian's email blast into my inbox every day, because it's too much. I know where they are. I can go to their websites when I'm ready to like scroll some headlines, but I support them because I support them. I don't want them to go away. They break important stories. They do important work. I want all of those institutions to continue to exist. But I don't necessarily read every single thing. I do read my St. Louis Daily newsletter every day. But I don't necessarily read all the stuff. So I think that's a really important distinction too, is just because you support them financially, like there's Substacks that I rarely read all the way through because I don't necessarily need the information. I know where to find y'all. I will go to their like the like platform is a really good example. I think I mentioned Casey Newton a lot here.
Yeah.
He's a journalist who I love because he intersectionally follows the same kinds of information that I want, which is the intersection of politics, media, and technology. And I think that's like a very important topic. I don't necessarily read I know where Platformer is. When I have time, I go. It's 3 stories a week. I'll sit on a Saturday. I have my coffee. I'm calm. And I'm like, okay, now's the time that I'm going to read Casey's stories about AI this week or whatever. So that's a really good way to sort of segue into okay. When you're talking about like finding an area of interest, let's talk about how those areas are multifaceted and how one topic can still keep you informed about what's going on, not just in that arena, but also how it connects to the rest of the world, right? Like, so let's talk about how that can work. And I'm just going to take that very vague, broad topic and I'm just going to land it right in Tim Fullerton's lap and let him start to unpack that.
Wow. Well, that's a big one, and that could be a whole podcast on its own. I mean, I think that most of the good reporters that are out there, or journalists in general, are going to give you the broader picture of how this thing fits in, right? So if we take the ICE situation in schools, for example, right? Like we know that this is, well, one was the number one campaign promise of his was to deport people, but it's a larger project to essentially give all of the power to white nationalists and get rid of any sort of competing power structures. That includes people of color or anybody that doesn't agree with their worldview. So if you are reading articles about national topics and you are not getting an understanding of how it fits in, then you are probably reading the wrong things. And I think that there are so many amazing, super talented journalists out there on their own. Casey's one of them, that are very much worth supporting. You know, I think that there is like Zateo, which is a new platform that Mehdi Hassan has created, and he's brought over. Taylor Lorenz is writing a column with him now. John Harwood, who is a great, great journalist and also a great person, is with him. I pay for that one. And, you know, there's like Aaron Rupar is holding the administration accountable every single day with clips on social and does some writing as well. Talking Points Memo, Josh Marshall, these types of folks, I think are the types that you should be following. And also, you know, I can't stress this enough, but like financially supporting. It is very, very hard to go out on your own. And so if you can afford the $5 a month, which is generally what a lot of these people charge, and actually it's what we charge to basically keep the lights running here and to do the newsletter, you know, it matters because we have distribution systems now at our disposal. I can't say will rival the power of a New York Times or a Washington Post because they don't, but
we don't have to.
We don't have to. And the men and women journalists who do this have now platforms where they can have a megaphone, but they also have to eat.
Right.
And you know, like I think we're all guilty of consuming media that we don't pay for, right? Because the nature of the internet was like the biggest democratization of information in history. But people need to make a living.
That has not worked out.
No, and
it's informed electorate.
It's created this like massive like disparity of income and all this sort of thing.
Right, yeah. And I'll say too, like speaking of free information and stuff and bad information systems, like I want to just and Jim Acosta, going back to that example and my obsession with media, the cable news networks don't. I linked to an interview that Chris Hayes did with Kara Swisher, which I think everybody should listen to. It's so good. And he owns up to it. You know, she says like, well, the cable news networks had plenty of responsibility to claim in terms of getting everybody keyed up all the time, because they had to kind of just fill these news voids with something, and they filled them basically with like rage bait talk shows is what a lot of these things are. So anyway, so in our newsletter you'll find that link, or just go to On with Kara Swisher, Chris Hayes, and it'll pop up. It's so good. I really recommend it. So I'm going to build on what Tim said, and I'm going to give people some suggestions on how to kind of, if you think about we'll use the word diet in a sort of literal way, where you have sort of your main dish and your sides, right? So you have your turkey and your mac and cheese and your mashed potatoes or stuffing, whatever is on your favorite Thanksgiving plate. I really recommend to people that you that you kind of think about your lens in a way, like, what am I looking at? And how can I do this in a way where I'm not constantly scared, angry, and I don't ever feed my brain with dopamine? Because dopamine is how you're going to get through your day without being anxious and depressed. Now, I love to read about and digest information about media, entertainment, and technology. I'm just that kind of nerd. So like when I'm sitting in waiting rooms for my husband, I have my main stuff, and then I have these tertiary. So I'm a big podcast person. I love podcasts because I love radio. I love public radio. That was my news diet of choice when I was younger. Was like NPR and All Things Considered and KCRW and things like that. I love public radio. So now I love podcasts. And so like, but just so people understand like what kind of nerd I am, my well, I'm kind of bored and I don't really want to, like, I want like hangout content. It's a podcast produced by Puck about Hollywood. Like I'm a dork. Like, so that's how I am. But all of those things, so my sort of the top of my information diet is always information about the technology platforms, because they are everything right now.
Right.
They're everything about what I care about. Advertising dollars, where they're going, because those advertising dollars matter so much to my second favorite topic, which is journalism and media. And if I'm interested in that, so it makes me kind of excited to read it. I look forward to reading about it. So I think you could take almost anything that you like reading about. That's what I'm going to challenge everybody to do. What do you like reading about? What is the thing that you enjoy? Food. Restaurants. Try running a restaurant without, I hate to say it, but like immigrant labor. All of these things, and feeding people is such a beautiful thing, and it can be very political. I think there's been a lot of really good examples of people that sort of follow the politics of food, right? It's how a shyster like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could get in front of people, because our food systems are so broken, and they find comfort in a liar like him, which is how he's able to even get as far as he's gotten in his nomination process. So I mentioned in the newsletter that I used to really love the show Real Sports with Brian Gumbel on HBO, because I don't know anything about sports. I don't really care about sports. It's not my thing. But that show used the lens of sports to talk about really important issues, and they did it in a beautiful, interesting, and engaging, and very deeply informative kind of 60 Minutes style way. So I'm going to toss that back over to Tim, because I know you know what I'm talking about because you've been nodding this whole time. And I think we can come up with like a few other examples of like, if you care about, and I think that's where you have to start. You have to start with something that sort of maybe brings you joy as a stretch, but at least feels native to you and not alienating. It doesn't make you feel stupid, right? Like, it's okay to start out your media diet with something that you're already deeply informed about, so that every time you're confronted with a story, you're not like, I don't understand. Is this real? Is this valid? Is this person, do they know what they're talking about? You know what I mean? So let's unpack that a little bit more, because I think that's really critical right now when, like you were saying, these systems are designed to be fire hoses, and the people who are running the government right now are very adept. One of them owns one of the fire hoses.
Right. Well, actually, yeah. I mean, and you saw the list of tech billionaires sitting in the front of at the inauguration in front of the cabinet, actually. I mean, and these are the people who control most of these channels. But, I think that it comes back to that ability, and it takes work to tune out the noise. I know I sound like a broken record here, but like, if anyone is a parent that's listening here, and I'm sure we've got some, like everybody knows that sometimes you tune your kids out or you tune a relative out or whatever. Like we all have skills to tune out, or if we got a boss that's being annoying or whatever, like, there's all of those types of things. And, you have to apply those skill sets uh, to news now, because otherwise you will just be eaten alive by it and probably be very anxious and very stressed and negative. And I think that like focusing on those key areas is going to get you through it. But you also have to unplug, and you also like, I mean, we all probably have somewhat of an addiction to our phones. I mean, I know I do. But like read a book, or like just you got to practice some self-care in this too, because it is a dark time and it is bad for lots of people, but you also have to live your life too. And, it just worrying about impending doom
Right.
is only going to hurt yourself,
Right.
because there's really not anything, unless it's time to mobilize and fight against something.
Right.
There, you have to you have to be able to separate, and you have
Right.
to be able to be like have a life,
Right.
because if there's a reason why politics is considered a young person's game, and why I don't work on campaigns anymore,
Right.
because younger people can handle, frankly, the physical and emotional abuse of working 18 hours a day on no
Right.
pay, sleeping on floors, and then like, drinking a
Yeah,
gallon of alcohol afterwards to cope, and then get up at 6 a.m. and do it all over again.
and drink
And
a gallon
adults
of caffeine. Yeah.
and then drink. Yeah, I mean, it's just like I don't know how I gained no pounds on the campaign, which I still to this day. I think it was because I had
Because
so
you
much
didn't have
stress.
time to eat
Well,
during the
and
day.
I just there was no snacking. It was like eating for survival, and I lived like
Right.
a mile away, so I walked back. But anyways, but like yeah,
Right.
it's those are not, if you are, and that is a campaign is a perfect example of being in it 24/7,
Right.
and that has an end date. And
Right.
right now, 4 year, 3 years and 11 months and two
Whatever
and a half
days.
weeks is
Yeah.
not really an end date. It's too far to fathom.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
finding those ways to unplug, or just focusing on the things that um, and
I
not, like I said, stop listening to Greenland shit. It's just like it's stupid nonsense. It's
well
not
that
happening.
one thing I say to people is there's like this set it I have sort of a set it and forget it switch, which is that like I set myself up to know that I don't have to be informed about everything, right? Um and I will specifically tune certain things out. That's a really good point. So like when there was this mishigas about whether or not the FBI entrapped I forget which former CIA director, that piece of shit, whatever his name is, I just forgot his name, thank God. Um and he was the FBI was like we like he can't be charged, and there was all this like nonsense, and it was all about Russia. And I tuned out a lot of the Russia stuff, by the way, during the first Trump administration, because I knew that everybody was wrong. I was like, this is all misinformation. This is stupid. This is the left's misinformation campaign. I'm not listening to any of it. It doesn't matter. It's not
Hmm.
real. He's being investigated. There's going to be a report. I don't have to pay attention to this every day. I don't have to watch Rachel Maddow. I don't have to watch MSNBC. I don't have to read the New York Times headlines about it. I don't have to listen to Adam Schiff drone on and on and on, because I know he's using this as a campaign platform for his Senate run in a couple of years. Like all of that, right? All of that. So I know that the areas that I follow, A, are very important, B, that I know a lot about them, C, that I don't have to pay attention 24/7. I will set up times in my life where I have the bandwidth emotionally and psychologically to absorb the very good information from people like Oliver Darcy, who I subscribe to, in case you knew who
Great.
I mentioned I've
He's
subscribed
great.
to.
Hmm.
The St. Louis Daily Newsletter, which is a local newsletter that follows like local politics in a brilliant and succinct and lovely way. And I can set up my life so that I absorb that information when I'm ready for it. I don't have to do it every morning. I don't
Right.
have to go on Blue Sky all the time. That's the kind of my scrolling of choice now. I like it. It's fun. I enjoy it. I've ranted on there a couple times today. So I think and I would say the same is true of activism. people when they're new to activism kind of try to be in too many spaces at once, right? Like
Yeah.
you kind of have to go, you know what I know a lot about? I know a lot about this. So I'm just going to focus on this, and I can't pay attention to the other terrible stuff going on in my community because my time is filled with helping unhoused people get food and resources, or helping to advocate for immigrants in my community who are here legally who might still get deported by the Trump administration, which is true of St. Louis. We were a hub for resettlement programs for like Afghan refugees, and now those people are like in some kind of hellish, ridiculous, unnecessary limbo. So that's the other aspect of it that I think is really important. Before we go, because we're gonna go, I want you to talk a little bit, Tim Fullerton, about how, in light of the fact that the major social platforms are capitulating utterly, especially like if TikTok ends up being sold to a U.S. Company or U.S. investor like Larry Ellison or whatever.
Ugh.
All this is, by the way, all this is a big play for who's going to control AI. Don't. Speaking of like how I know how we follow this stuff, like we're in the middle of the AI platform wars, and it's ugly and terrible, and they're venal and they're rich, and I don't know why they need more money. But how this is kind of also where in the newsletter is that the internet is still open. Whether you know it or not, the internet itself is still a very open system. We've seen it ourselves when we talk to clients about like where are your users, where are they hanging out? It's never Instagram. There's a Discord thread, there's a subreddit, there's a whatever, right? That's where they're hanging out. It's not even a decentralized network like Blue Sky. So Tim, I want you to talk a little bit about the hope that you and I both have a lot of hope for what this going back to a less centralized web and what it's going to look like, because that's kind of where we started our journey as internet users with like,
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that, and let's end on a hopeful note about how we think it's a good thing in a way that like these assholes stood next to Trump and were like, we are corrupt, we have bought the government, and fuck you, we don't care. Yeah. That to me is the breaking point for a lot of people, and I think there's a lot of buildup coming, and I want you to talk a little bit about that before we head out.
I actually do think that there is hope, and there is good news that is coming out of the darkness, and that is that for the last 12 to 15 years, we have been completely at the mercy of the social media networks. I mean, you saw it with journalism when Facebook was like the cash cow for journalism, when they used to allow people to put links up and go to off this platform, and then they turned it off and devastated journalism at least in the United States. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Twitter, people built major profiles and made money on Twitter, and then Elon essentially destroyed it. Instagram was the same. You used to be able to, you had a relatively chronological feed. I mean, I've built accounts on Instagram that have gotten into the millions. It's almost impossible to do that now. And when they're locked, and one of these guys changes their policies, you're screwed. You can't take those followers. There's no downloading the list of followers and taking them. So you see people jumping and jumping and jumping, and then it becomes more dispersed because some people went to Blue Sky, some people went to Threads, some went to this. But now what we're starting to see is actually a return and the rise of email. And we use Ghost, which is a nonprofit organization that runs it, and that powers our newsletter and our website, and also our, if you were to subscribe and fund our work, which I would love you to, at politigoodpod.com, politigoodpod.com, say that again. But also, with the Twitter stuff, there's been a mass exodus of people from Twitter to Substack. And Substack, which has some, they have some policies about who they allow on there that I don't agree with. But I, at this point in our timeline, am having a hard time drawing a hard line on everybody, because then that would mean I'd be nowhere. So they have some problems, and I would like to see them fix those problems.
You share your TikToks on there primarily, is what you.
Yeah, and and I'll do a little bit of narrative, but the beauty is anybody who subscribes to you on Substack, you get their email address. So say Substack folds because they are not profitable and is entirely possible, or they get bought and ruined, which is probably the most likely scenario. I can export that list and move it to Ghost
For
with me.
now.
Well, for now, right? I mean, like,
Right, right.
all I can say is
Yeah,
what's
yeah, for
allowed
sure.
right now,
Correct.
and I have almost 2,000 people that have signed up for my Substack in a week and a day,
Right.
and there's a social networking effect there. They have notes that are part of social network, and also when you subscribe, it gives recommendations. So
Yeah.
there's a bit of virality that goes as well, and I've spent $0 on it, and you know, but I think old school blogging is sort of a thing that is coming back.
I think it is too. I think that's
Yeah.
what's so. And when people are, I feel for people, and I'll throw this back to you, and then we'll close out. I really, there's something really valuable about perspective, and as your body starts to decay as you get older, it sucks. Like the only thing that keeps me off my phone all the time. This is one of the jokes that I have is that like the best thing that ever happened to my phone uses was spinal stenosis because it literally hurts to hold my phone, so I have to put it
I
down.
guess that's a benefit, I suppose.
That's some silver
Optimism.
lining.
Yeah.
That's some silver lining. I still
Yep.
like my this is I was what my left shoulder was throbbing the other night, but I just had to watch Bernie Sanders just eviscerate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh, I
during
saw
his
some of
Senate
that. It was
hearings.
great.
I
Yeah.
love that he was like Bobby, like that he called him.
Yeah,
I
Bobby.
was like, oh, mwah. It was worth the pain.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that's gonna keep me up at night. I love it. Um, but I think like a really good way to end this is to talk about how when you have that perspective of the web before Facebook, right?
Yeah.
The web before Google bought YouTube, for Christ's sakes, right?
Yeah, that's
And
2007 or something like that.
five. It was
They bought it in
2005.
five?
Yeah.
Oh God.
And it was
Okay.
$1 billion and my eyes popped up. I was like, what?
Yeah, it's like and it's
Holy
the best it's like the best acquisition in in
in
corporate
history.
or something
Yeah,
like
they're
that.
just
Yeah, yeah,
like, did you think that billion was a lot? I hate Eric Schmidt, but man, he was right. So that perspective is really important right now because I remember what it was like to not just go to one place and have shit thrown in my face, where I had to kind of like I talk about in the newsletter. I talk about subscribing to. I forget what the name of the actual like independent, very, very, very lefty publication was that I used to get. Robert Fisk's excellent
Mm.
reporting about the Iraq War and the Afghan invasion and all that back in the day, and that that was a way to get like a real. It was kind of pre-Substack in a way. This like
Yeah.
very smart on the ground. There's a name. So Fisking. He has a term named for him, which was like debunking, basically go line by line debunking of an article that's named for him. Anyway, so I know how to do that natively. I know how to, and I get real pleasure out of kind of like I was just saying, like self-selecting is what we're talking about, ascribing very specific times in the day or week to like absorb this information. So it's not just like bombarding your poor little tired, I barely woke up brain, or I need to go to bed brain, or I'm on my lunch break. You get to pick for yourself when you look at this stuff. You don't have to look at it all the time. But I think people need guidance in how to do that because it's if you didn't do it before, or you weren't an adult. You don't know what the web was like. What's your last piece of advice about how to navigate information systems in a way that allows you to bypass a Meta owned platform or the one owned by the South African that's currently controlling the executive branch of the United States?
So, yeah, it's a great question, and
It's a
uh,
journey, really, I would say.
it is yeah.
It is.
The joys in the journey is something that my old boss Ken Salazar used to say all the time, and I won't try to do my impersonation of him on here in case he's listening, but I do want him to come on this podcast, so I won't do that. But I think that it's almost taking a page out of the internet pre 2005, 2006, which means you have to do some research. And in fact, it's just too easy, right? Look, honestly, like I thought this would be a good thing. It's turning out not to be. It is just too easy to get information, which means it's too easy to get bad information. And so I think you have to be intentional to find the right people to follow. and
Hmm. I love
it
that
is
word. I love intentional when it comes
it
to the
isn't.
internet.
I mean, it
Yeah.
right because you can open up Facebook, and whether you want it or not, you might get vaccine misinformation just shoved in your face from some high school person that you haven't talked to in 25 years. All of a sudden, you have bad information in your face. And some people can dismiss it, and sometimes if you see it enough times, you start to believe it. So I do think, in a way, it's too easy. So that's why I think being intentional and choosing authors. And this is another, I'm going to bring a blast from the past why I miss Google Reader so much. And I will go to my
Mm.
grave being mad at Google for getting rid of that. But
Mm-hmm.
like, it was just so easy to save articles so that you could go
Yep.
and read them when you wanted to. It is amazing to me that nobody has built this since in any way that actually works and functions. Like, what? Anyways, rant over. But, like, I think finding the independent journalists, like Oliver Darcy's a great one, was at CNN, and like
So
if you care
good.
about media, he is
Oh
fantastic.
man, the
You know,
best. His
I
his
think
scoops are edible. They're
he
edible
gets
scoops.
everything. He gets
Everything.
everything. Also because none of the cable news do this work anymore. Like Brian Stelter kind of a little bit, but not really. So he's essentially the media reporter now, and he's killing it. Like I'm pretty
Killing
sure
it.
they're already in a seven-figure situation, I think, which is amazing. And but
And
like
he's on Beehive, by the way. He's not on Substack. He's on Beehive. I was so
that's
proud of
right.
him. I
That's
was
right,
like,
which is
thanks,
great.
Oliver Darcy.
Yeah. But like you can find those people. Jim Acosta, go support Jim. That guy is a killer journalist, and he is going to hold this
And
administration
Jim
accountable.
will that Edward R. Murrow speech he gave before he flipped his finger off at Substack
Oh,
at CNN before he left.
oh,
I was just like, I don't even. I mean, I haven't watched CNN and I couldn't tell you how many
I don't
years because
watch
it's
it.
so annoying.
Hmm.
But I know who he is and I know that he's like kind of the real deal. And
He is.
that fireball of a like fuck you on the way
Yeah.
out speech he gave, I was
Hmm.
like, that is magnificent. Yeah. So
So go give
as
him
much
money,
as yeah, go give
basically.
him yeah.
Go give him money, and like I said, support you. We have to like. This is not a freebie situation anymore, folks.
Yeah.
Like because of the current state of traditional media, which is
Yep.
basically owned by a bunch of billionaires, tech companies all owned by a bunch of billionaires. We have to reach in our pockets. And there are some, like you also mentioned, and I'll mention the Philadelphia Inquirer as another publication that is worth subscribing to,
So
that is a
good.
national outlet. Like, and Will Bunch is a great
Yeah.
columnist, op-ed columnist. Like, go give them, and I think you can get them for like 6 months for like a penny or $1 or something. Like,
Yeah.
but like we have to fund it.
The San
And
Jose Merc is another good example of
great,
like,
yep.
yeah.
Like drop your LA Times and drop your Washington Post and whatever else you've got and give it to these people. The country needs it and we need it. So it is a bit of research, being intentional.
And well
But if we
and
do these things, but also like if we
yeah.
do these things and these guys get to hold power accountable because they don't have an overlord saying we need to sell advertising, it's going to make this country so
And
much better.
And I'll just say too that like when you are when you're supporting who is essentially like somebody who's smart enough to figure out how to be a media entrepreneur, which is what I've been screaming.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that I found Kara Swisher back in the day is because I was like, where are these people who are not being honest with journalists about like, look, the day's coming when you're gonna have to figure out how to be an entrepreneur if you want to be a journalist. Sorry, it just
Right.
is. You
Right.
just do. That's just where
We've
we
known this for
are.
20 years.
Right. Figure it out. So if you do have that relationship with them and they turn into some kind of MAGA asshole, they will feel the pain in a way.
Right.
Like Jeff Bezos could give a shit that the Washington Post is losing money. I mean,
It
he
doesn't
probably
matter to
regrets
him.
buying it, but whatever. It doesn't have to make money for him. But like an independent writer, if they say something favorable about some nihilistic MAGA idiot or whatever in a way to kind of curry favor, we can all bail and we'll just be like, we'll just go find somebody else. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
So they have like a different relationship with their readers, which can be a problem, but it is generally anyway, right? Like that's not a problem
Yeah.
that doesn't exist.
It's a much better situation than we were in 5 years ago when these platforms didn't really exist for them.
Right. And when people weren't suddenly aware of the necessity
Right.
of journalists with integrity. Well, I'll let's end here. If you need, I'll say this. Let's say that you're listening to this and you're like, I really have no earthly idea where to start. I want to know how to do that, but I'm busy and I'm overwhelmed and I'm scared and I'm freaked out and I don't know what's real anymore. And can I trust that? Just send us an email. Just hello@politigoodpod.com. Just let us know We don't have to. We won't blast anything. We won't put it. Just let us know, and we promise we will help you. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find Tim on Blue Sky. You can find us through our Politigood channels anywhere. Let us know. We don't want anybody to feel alienated. We want you to feel safe and we want you to feel informed. Yeah?
Yes.
All right.
We're here for you guys.
We're here. Thanks so much for joining me, Tim. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Parker and Tim Fullerton. Audio, music, and engineering by Chris Lombardo. Our assistant producer is Lizette Nolasco. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts and watch entire